Montana Territory, late autumn of the 1800s. Out here, winter wasn't a season. It was a verdict. There were no second chances once the snow settled in. No delivery wagons. No backup heat. No outside help when temperatures dropped below zero and stayed there. If your shelter failed, you didn't complain. You endured or you didn't survive. Frontiermen understood this in their bones. A cabin wasn't just a place to sleep, it was life support. It decided how much firewood you burned, how often you woke up at night, how tired you were by morning, and whether your family made it to spring. Most settlers built the same way for one reason: speed. A rectangular log cabin went up fast. Straight trees, right angles, familiar work. You could raise walls in weeks, sometimes days, and move inside before the first heavy snow. That mattered when winter arrived early, and it often did. But speed came with a price no one liked to talk about. Log cabins leaked heat. Corners trapped cold air. Wind slammed into flat walls and sucked warmth right out. Fires had to burn constantly. Men woke every 2 hours to feed them. Miss one feeding and the temperature inside could drop fast enough to freeze water buckets solid. Winter didn't care how hard you worked. It didn't care how experienced you were. It only cared whether your shelter obeyed physics. That's the part many frontier builders never fully understood. They trusted tradition because tradition felt safe. Their fathers built square cabins. Their neighbors built square cabins. So they did the same, assuming survival meant copying what had worked before. But survival isn't about habit, it's about results. Every winter tested those results. Some years were forgiving, others were brutal. And when a brutal winter came, it exposed weaknesses no one wanted to admit existed. This story begins in one of those places where winter arrived early, stayed late, and punished mistakes without mercy. A valley where dozens of cabins stood ready, all built the same way, all confident they were prepared. And among them, one man chose to build differently, not because he wanted attention, not because he wanted to prove anyone wrong, but because he understood one hard truth the frontier often ignored. Winter is the final judge, and it never accepts excuses. In the Bitterroot Valley, cabins followed a pattern so common no one questioned it. Rectangular, log walls, straight corners, a stone or dirt hearth pushed against one wall to save space. It was the frontier default. There were practical reasons for it. Trees were everywhere. Logs could be cut, dragged, and stacked quickly. Corners were easy to frame. Roofs were simple. A man with basic tools and a few neighbors could raise a cabin fast, and speed mattered more than perfection when snow was already dusting the high ridges. But what settlers gained in speed, they lost in efficiency. Square cabins fight winter in the worst possible way. Flat walls give wind a solid surface to attack. Corners become cold traps where air stagnates and frost forms. Heat rises pools near the ceiling and leaves the floor cold. Families slept low, close to the fire, while the upper half of the room wasted warmth no one could use. Most men compensated the only way they knew how: burn more wood. Firewood became currency. It dictated daily routines. Men planned their lives around cutting, hauling, splitting, and stacking. A poor woodpile meant fear. A shrinking pile meant sleepless nights. By January, survival wasn't about comfort, it was about endurance. Yet no one blamed the cabin design. They blamed the weather. They blamed bad luck. They blamed weak winters in the past that had spoiled them. But they never blamed the shape of the shelter itself. Tradition had a grip on frontier thinking. If something failed slowly, people tolerated it. If it failed loudly, they noticed. Log cabins didn't collapse. They just drained energy night after night, winter after winter. And because everyone suffered the same way, it felt normal. That's the danger of shared hardship. When everyone struggles equally, no one thinks to ask whether the struggle is necessary. So when one man in the valley chose not to build square when he started laying stone in a circle, people didn't see innovation. They saw waste. They saw delay. They saw someone ignoring the hard-earned lessons of frontier life. What they didn't see was that those lessons were incomplete. The valley believed it already knew how to survive winter. Winter was about to prove otherwise. The man who built differently didn't arrive with blueprints or theories. He arrived with memory. He came from cold country, the kind of cold that doesn't scare you, it teaches you. Winters that don't test comfort, but survival. Places where shelter isn't decoration, it's discipline. Back home, he had seen stone huts scattered across mountain land. Not big houses, not fancy buildings. Simple round shelters built by people who spent their lives exposed to wind, snow, and long, dark nights. Those huts weren't designed by engineers. They were shaped by generations of failure and correction. They stayed warm because they had to. As a boy, he noticed things others ignored. How the walls stayed warm long after the fire burned down. How the wind slid around the structure instead of slamming into it. How there were no cold corners to hide frost or trap damp air. Heat didn't rush out. It stayed put. Those lessons stayed with him. When he crossed the ocean and ended up in Montana territory, he didn't forget them. But he also didn't talk about them much. On the frontier, explaining yourself too much invited trouble. You worked. You proved. Or you failed quietly. So when he claimed land in the Bitterroot Valley, he didn't reach for an axe first. He reached for stone. That choice alone marked him as different. Stone meant effort. Stone meant time. Stone meant carrying weight when others were already raising walls. It meant working alone while neighbors finished cabins and moved inside. People assumed he was stubborn or proud or ignorant of local conditions. He wasn't any of those things. He simply trusted experience that ran deeper than local tradition. Experience passed down by people who had learned long before him that cold doesn't forgive mistakes, and that shape, mass, and placement matter more than speed. Frontier America prized innovation, but only when it looked familiar. Anything that came from outside was suspect. Anything old was dismissed as outdated. What they didn't realize was that he wasn't bringing something foreign. He was bringing back something forgotten, and winter was about to remind them why it once existed. Stone made people nervous for a simple reason: it felt cold. Anyone who has touched stone in winter knows the sensation. You place your hand on it, and the chill bites instantly. Log walls feel different. They're cool but forgiving. Stone feels harsh, unwelcoming, like it's pulling heat straight out of your skin. That feeling shaped frontier belief. Most settlers concluded something that felt obvious: stone steals, heatwood holds it. End of discussion. No calculations, no measurements, just experience reinforced by touch. But that conclusion was wrong. Stone doesn't create cold. It transfers heat. Fast. When your hand touches stone, heat flows from your skin into the rock quickly, so it feels colder than wood at the same temperature. Wood transfers heat slowly, so it feels warmer even when it isn't. That difference fooled generations of builders. Frontier cabins were judged by comfort at first contact, not by performance over time. People cared about how walls felt at dawn, not how they behaved at midnight. Stone failed the first test, so it was never given the second. There was also the labor issue. Stone meant hauling weight, lifting, fitting, mortaring, all before winter closed in. Log cabins were forgiving. Stone demanded precision and patience, two things frontier life rarely had time for. And then there was fear of commitment. Once you built in stone, you couldn't change your mind easily. Logs could be moved, added to, repaired fast. Stone locked you into your decisions. If you were wrong, you paid for it all winter. So stone was dismissed as risky, impractical, and old-fashioned. Something for churches, forts, or rich men back east. not for working hunters and homesteaders scraping by on the edge of survival. What no one stopped to consider was, this stone doesn't lose heat quickly. It absorbs it slowly and releases it slowly. That makes it terrible for short bursts of warmth, but exceptional for long winters. Frontier builders focused on starting fires. They never asked what happened after the fire burned down. That mistake would soon become impossible to ignore. Most frontier builders thought shape was about convenience. Square rooms stacked easily. Straight walls accepted furniture. Corners gave places to store tools, hang coats, stack supplies. Geometry to them was a matter of use, not performance. But winter doesn't care how easy a room is to organize. A square cabin creates problems the moment the fire is lit. Heat moves unevenly. Warm air rises and collects near the ceiling. Cold air sinks and pools along the floor. Corners become dead zones where air barely circulates. Frost forms there first. Dampness settles. Mold follows. Cold stays. Wind makes it worse. Flat walls take the full force of winter gusts. Every blast strips heat away, pushing cold deep into the structure. Corners catch pressure and turbulence, pulling warmth outward through cracks no one can seal completely. A circle behaves differently. Wind doesn't hit it, it slides around it. Pressure distributes evenly instead of concentrating at weak points. There are no corners for cold to hide in. Air moves continuously, naturally circulating instead of stagnating. This wasn't theory. Humans figured it out long before engineers named it. Look at ancient shelters across cold regions, stone huts, earth lodges, round dwellings partially sunk into the ground. Different cultures, same shape, same reason. A circle uses less wall length to enclose the same space. Less surface area means fewer places for heat to escape. Every inch of wall sits the same distance from the center, so heat spreads evenly instead of favoring one side. That matters when firewood is limited. A central heat source in a square cabin wastes energy. One wall overheats while the opposite wall stays cold. A central fire in a round space radiates outward equally. No favoritism. No cold spots. Frontier builders didn't ignore geometry because they were foolish. They ignored it because square cabins worked well enough most of the time. But well enough fails in extreme conditions. When winter stops being seasonal and becomes relentless, geometry stops being decoration. It becomes survival math. And the man building round understood that math long before the first snow fell. Frontier men understood fire. They understood wood. They understood hard work. What they didn't understand, because no one had ever explained it to them, was thermal mass. Thermal mass isn't complicated. It's the ability of a material to absorb heat, store it, and release it slowly over time. Air heats fast and cools fast. Wood does the same, just a little slower. Stone is different. It takes time to warm up, but once it does, it holds that heat like a savings account you can draw from all night long. That difference changes everything in winter. Most log cabins rely on constant fire because the walls don't store much heat. The moment the fire weakens, the temperature drops. That's why men wake every few hours to feed flames. The cabin isn't holding warmth, it's leaking it. Stone cabins work on a different cycle. You don't heat the air, you heat the structure. When stone walls absorb heat, they become a source of warmth themselves. Long after the fire dies down, the walls continue releasing energy back into the space. The temperature drops slowly, predictably, safely. This is why stone feels cold at first. It hasn't been charged yet, but once it is, it becomes stable in a way wood never can. Frontier builders misunderstood this because their winters taught urgency. They needed warmth now, not later. Stone seemed inefficient because it didn't respond instantly. But winter isn't instant, it's long. That's the mistake. They built for short-term comfort, not long-term survival. There's another factor: they didn't know how to measure heat loss over time. A log cabin might feel warmer right after lighting a fire, but it loses that heat fast. A stone structure warms slower, but it loses heat far more slowly. In extreme cold, slow loss matters more than fast gain. The man building the round stone cabin wasn't ignoring physics. He was trusting it quietly, patiently, without naming it. He wasn't planning for warmth at sunset. He was planning for warmth at 4 in the morning when fires fail and mistakes become fatal. Knowing something works and having time to build it are two very different problems on the frontier. Winter did not wait for ideas to finish forming. Snow came when it came. And once it arrived, construction stopped. Stone froze. Mortar failed. Fingers went numb. Mistakes became permanent. That was the risk he took. While other men raised log walls in days, he moved stone one piece at a time. Every block had to be chosen for weight and density. Too soft and it would crumble. Too brittle and it would crack in the freeze. Each stone had to sit just right because curves don't forgive sloppiness the way straight walls do. There was no rushing it. Neighbors finished their cabins while his walls were still knee-high. They moved inside lit fires and watched him work in the open air. To them it looked backwards. He was exposed while they were already sheltered. They assumed that meant failure. But speed has a hidden cost. Fast builds rely on forgiveness. If a log doesn't fit perfectly, you chink the gap. If a corner leaks air, you hang a blanket. Stone doesn't allow that kind of laziness. If you place it wrong, the entire curve suffers. So he worked slow, sunrise to sunset. No wasted movement, no extra words. Stone mortar stone again. The wall rose evenly, layer by layer, always balanced, always circular. If he rushed one section, the structure would fight him later. That discipline came from experience, not theory. He had seen what happens when shelters are built quickly but poorly. They don't fail immediately. They fail when it matters most. Every day the clock ticked louder. First frost, then early snow on the peaks. Each morning carried the question no one asked out loud, will he finish in time? He didn't answer it. He just kept building. Frontier survival often looks dramatic in stories. In reality, it looks like this quiet effort under pressure, choosing long-term safety over short-term comfort. By the time the first real snow arrived, the walls stood ready. Whether they would protect him was another question entirely. Winter was almost there. The laughter started early and never really stopped. At first it was casual, a joke tossed across a fence, a comment muttered while passing by. Looks like a well house, building a grain bin now, nothing cruel, just the kind of talk men use when something doesn't make sense to them. But as weeks passed and the structure stayed round, the tone shifted. By then, other cabins were finished, roofs on, fires burning, families settling in. And there he was, still shaping stone, still working outside while the air turned sharp and mornings froze hard. That's when certainty turned into confidence. Frontier men trusted experience above all else. Many of them had survived half a dozen winters already. Some had built dozens of cabins. In their minds, survival proved expertise. And expertise made them sure that stone was a mistake. Sure that round walls wasted space. Sure that corners weren't the enemy. Certainty is dangerous when it goes untested. They offered advice he didn't ask for, warnings he already understood. Some did it kindly, others did it to feel smarter. A few did it because they genuinely didn't want to watch a man freeze to death over stubborn pride. What they didn't realize was that he wasn't being stubborn. He was being quiet. He didn't argue, didn't explain, didn't try to convert anyone. On the frontier, explaining yourself too much made you look weak or desperate. Results mattered more than reasons. Children picked up on the mood. They laughed openly, made jokes about round houses and strange foreigners. Adults smiled at that. Let it happen. Laughter made them comfortable in their own choices. That's how groups protect their beliefs. If the strange idea is laughable, it doesn't have to be considered. By the time the roof went on and the door was set, the verdict was already decided in the valley's mind. He would regret it, he would learn the hard way, and if things got bad enough, someone would take him in. Winter would teach him, they thought. They didn't realize winter was about to teach all of them something instead. The first real cold arrived without warning. One morning the valley woke up, and the air felt wrong, heavy, sharp, unforgiving. The kind of cold that doesn't bite immediately but sinks in and stays. By noon, breath hung thick in the air. By nightfall, the temperature dropped past zero and kept falling. Frontier families knew this pattern. Early cold tested readiness. Real cold exposed weakness. Fires were lit before sunset. Doors were sealed. Windows covered with cloth and hides. Inside the log cabins, men worked fast, feeding flames, banking coals, stacking wood close enough to reach without stepping outside. That first night, most cabins held on. By the second night, the problem started. Cold settled into the corners first. Floors turned icy. Frost crept along the inside walls like white mold. Water buckets skinned over, then froze solid. Families shifted closer to the hearth, abandoning half the cabin because it cost too much fuel to heat unused space. Sleep came in short pieces. Men woke every 2 hours to feed fires. Miss one feeding and the temperature dropped hard. Children cried in their sleep. Hands cracked. Faces burned from heat on one side and cold on the other. By the third night, exhaustion set in. That's when winter stops being physical and starts being mental. Fatigue clouds judgment. Small mistakes stack up. A poorly banked fire, a door left open too long, a man slipping on ice during a midnight trip to the woodpile. Frontier winters didn't kill fast. They wore people down. Across the valley, cabins fought the same losing battle. More wood burned, more heat lost, more effort for less return. The cold wasn't extreme yet, but it was steady, relentless, and everyone knew worse was coming. And then there was the round stone cabin. From the outside, it looked unchanged. No smoke pouring out, no frantic movement, just a low, steady plume rising from the roof vent. No signs of struggle, no signs of urgency. Inside, something different was happening. The stone walls were warming, slowly, deliberately absorbing heat, hour after hour. The fire didn't roar. It didn't need to. It worked quietly, charging the structure instead of fighting the air. While log cabins lost heat the moment flames dipped, the stone cabin was storing it. That difference wasn't obvious yet, not to anyone watching from the outside. But winter wasn't finished. And when the real cold arrived, the valley would finally see what preparation actually looked like. The deep freeze arrived like a hammer. One night the temperature dropped fast and didn't recover by morning. By noon it was well below zero. By sunset it was far worse, the kind of cold that makes sound travel strangely and wood crack without warning, the kind that turns effort into pain. Inside the log cabins, fires burned hot and constant. Men fed them like living things. Miss one feeding and the cold rushed in. Flames roared, but the warmth never spread evenly. Near the hearth, it was barely tolerable. A few feet away, breath still fogged. By the fourth day, exhaustion was visible. Faces looked tight. Movements slowed. Woodpiles shrank faster than planned. People stopped pretending this was normal. That was when one of the neighbors made the walk. He expected the worst. He expected to knock on the door and find a man bundled in layers, half-frozen pride finally broken. He was already planning what he would say. Something kind, something practical. When the door opened, everything changed. Warmth hit him in the face. Not less cold, not bearable. Real warmth. The kind you feel in your chest. The kind that makes your hands ache as blood returns. The man inside wasn't wrapped in blankets. He wasn't huddled near the fire. He was standing upright, calm, steady, wearing nothing heavier than a work shirt. The fire itself was modest. No roaring blaze, no desperate feeding, just a steady burn at the center of the room. The walls told the real story. When the visitor touched them, he expected cold. Instead, he felt warmth, deep, even steady. The stone wasn't hot. It was charged, like sun-warmed rock in summer that keeps its heat long after dusk. The air was stable. No cold spots. No dead zones. No corners to flee from. Warmth filled the space evenly, quietly, without effort. The visitor checked his thermometer out of disbelief, not curiosity. The number made him pause. Inside that stone circle, it was warmer than any log cabin in the valley by a margin that shouldn't have been possible. That moment didn't just change one man's mind. It shattered a belief system. The door closed behind him, but the truth followed him back into the cold. Frontiermen trusted tools more than talk. You could argue opinions all night, but a thermometer didn't care what you believed. By the next morning, word had spread, quietly at first, then with urgency. Men began walking through the snow toward the round stone cabin, each carrying the same thing in a coat pocket or glove-proof. They measured their own homes first. Inside log cabins, temperatures hovered just above freezing in the best spots. Near the hearth, you might see the low teens. In corners, single digits. Some places were barely warmer than outside air, and that was with fires burning hard and often. Then they stepped inside the stone cabin. The numbers stopped conversations cold. Mid-60s, high 60s, stable, not rising and falling with the fire, not spiking near the hearth and collapsing across the room, just steady, even warmth. Men checked twice. Some checked 3 times. They held thermometers at different heights, near the wall, near the floor, in the center. The readings barely changed. That shouldn't have happened. One man asked the question. Everyone was thinking, what happens when the fire goes out? So they waited. That evening, the fire was allowed to burn down early. No stoking, no banking, just embers by nightfall. In a log cabin, that would have meant disaster. Temperatures would drop fast, sometimes 20 degrees in the first hour. Inside the stone cabin, the walls did the work. Hours passed. Midnight came, then early morning. The temperature fell slowly, predictably, never sharply. By dawn, it was still warm enough to sleep without waking. That was the moment doubt died. What they were seeing wasn't luck. It wasn't a trick. It was stored energy being released on its own schedule. The stone walls weren't stealing heat. They were returning it. Geometry kept the heat moving. Mass kept it alive. Placement kept it efficient. The math didn't lie. And on the frontier, when the math proved something worked, pride didn't matter anymore. Because belief doesn't keep you warm. Measurement does. On the frontier, firewood wasn't a comfort. It was a survival budget. Every log burned had a cost. Time spent cutting, energy hauling, risk splitting frozen wood, frostbite during night trips to the pile. When winter tightened its grip, firewood determined how long a family could hold out. That's why the numbers mattered. Men began comparing notes. How much wood they burned each day. How often they fed the fire. How fast their stacks shrank. The pattern was the same across the valley. Log cabins demanded constant fuel just to stay barely livable. The stone cabin didn't. It used less wood and it did more with it. One evening, fire. One morning, fire. That was enough. The rest of the time, the walls carried the load. Heat released slowly, evenly, without attention. No frantic stoking. No midnight runs outside. No fear of waking up to frozen breath. That difference changed daily life. Less wood burned meant less time cutting, less exposure to cold, less exhaustion, fewer mistakes made by tired men in dangerous conditions. In winter, energy saved, his life extended. Frontier survival wasn't heroic, it was logistical. If you could reduce effort without reducing safety, you lived longer. If you burned less fuel to get more warmth, you won the season. The stone cabin didn't just make winter comfortable, it made it manageable. Families in log cabins lived at the edge of their resources, hoping the weather would break before their wood ran out. The man in the stone cabin lived inside his margin. He had buffer, room for error, time to think. That's the difference between surviving and enduring. When the cold finally eased and the valley took stock of what it had lost wood sleep strength, the lesson was clear. Heat efficiency isn't a luxury. It's the difference between reacting to winter and staying ahead of it. Frontier pride is a stubborn thing. Men will endure cold, hunger, and exhaustion long before they admit they were wrong. But winter has a way of stripping pride down to what matters. Once the measurements were taken, once the numbers were written down in plain sight, something shifted in the valley. The laughter stopped. The jokes disappeared. Conversations changed tone. Questions replaced certainty. Men began stopping by the stone cabin, not to mock, but to look. They walked the circle slowly. They pressed their palms to the walls. They studied the hearth placement. They asked practical questions: how thick, how wide, how much stone, how long to build. No speeches, no arguments, just observation. That's how real knowledge spreads on the frontier. Not through persuasion, but through results. The builder didn't guard his design. He didn't charge for advice. He didn't claim ownership. He explained what he knew in plain terms. Stone holds heat. Shape moves air. Fire placed right works better. Build for winter, not for speed. Some men asked for help modifying their cabins. A stone heat wall added behind a hearth. A rounded interior corner. A heavier masonry base. Small changes at first. Safer changes. Others went further. By spring, plans were being drawn not on paper but in the dirt with sticks and boot heels. Circles instead of rectangles. Central hearths instead of wall fires. Thicker walls where the wind hit hardest. The idea traveled the way frontier wisdom always did, by word of mouth, by shared hardship, by remembered cold. Visitors carried the story out of the valley. Surveyors, traders, hunters passing through. They described a cabin that stayed warm when others froze, using less wood and less effort. Some believed it, some didn't, but a few remembered it. And remembering is how forgotten knowledge survives long enough to matter again. By the time spring broke, the valley opened. The lesson was no longer about one cabin. It was about how easily people confuse tradition with truth. The log cabin wasn't wrong. It had carried generations west. It worked most of the time. But frontier life rewarded what worked best, not what felt familiar, and winter had made that distinction clear. The round stone cabin didn't succeed because it was clever. It succeeded because it obeyed rules that never change. Heat moves, air circulates, mass stores energy, geometry matters. Nature doesn't negotiate. What failed wasn't craftsmanship, it was assumption. Frontier men assumed experience meant understanding. They assumed survival in the past guaranteed survival in the future. They assumed that because something was common, it was optimal. Winter exposed those assumptions as expensive. The deeper lesson wasn't about stone versus wood or round versus square. It was about humility in the face of environment. The land doesn't care how things have always been done. It only responds to what actually works. That's frontier wisdom at its core. You listen first. You observe longer than you speak. You test ideas against reality, not reputation. The man who built round didn't defeat winter by fighting harder. He defeated it by cooperating with forces older than any settlement. He shaped his shelter the way cold climates always had, quietly, efficiently, without ego. That mindset is what carried people through the hardest places on the map. Not strength alone, not speed, but alignment with reality. Frontier history is full of men who were confident and froze. It's also full of people who adapted quietly and lived long enough to be called lucky. They weren't lucky, they were attentive. And that may be the most important survival lesson winter ever taught. Cold doesn't just attack the body, it works on the mind. Frontier journals rarely say this directly, but the pattern is clear. Extended cold makes people reckless. Tired men take shortcuts. Judgment slips, tempers shorten. Small problems turn into serious mistakes. A cold shelter keeps you alive. A stable shelter keeps you thinking clearly. That difference mattered more than most people realized. In log cabins during deep winter, sleep came in fragments. Men woke repeatedly to feed fires. Children stirred and cried. Muscles never fully relaxed. Minds stayed alert even when bodies needed rest. Over days and weeks, that kind of sleep deprivation wore people down. Exhaustion changes how decisions are made. You delay repairs. You burn wood faster than planned. You skip steps you know are important. You misjudge weather. You underestimate risk. Frontier winters didn't just kill through exposure. They killed through poor decisions made by worn-out people. Inside the round stone cabin, the rhythm was different. The temperature didn't swing wildly. Nights stayed warm enough to sleep through. Mornings didn't begin in panic. The fire was a task, not an emergency. That stability gave something rare on the frontier mental margin. When your shelter holds steady, your mind does too. That mattered for hunting, for rationing food, for choosing when to travel and when to stay put. Clear thinking extended survival just as much as stored heat. There's a reason traditional cold climate shelters aim for consistency, not peaks of warmth. Extreme heat followed by extreme cold stresses the body and mind. Stable warmth conserves energy. The round stone cabin didn't just save firewood, it reduced stress. It allowed routine. It made winter predictable instead of threatening. That predictability is powerful. Frontier life punished uncertainty. Anything that reduced it, steady shelter, reliable heat. Fewer emergencies extended lives quietly, without drama. Warmth isn't about comfort, it's about control. And the man who built in stone understood something most. Surviving winter isn't about enduring misery bravely. It's about removing unnecessary hardship, so your strength is available when it truly matters. That's not softness, that's discipline. The round stone cabin wasn't a relic. It was a reminder. The principles that kept it warm haven't aged. Physics doesn't expire. Geometry doesn't follow trends. Cold climates still punish the same mistakes they did a century ago. Modern off-grid builders face different tools but the same problems. Limited energy, harsh weather, long winters. If anything, reliance on systems makes failure more dangerous, not less. When power goes out, you're back to shelter and heat. The lesson is simple: build for conditions, not convenience. Thermal mass still works. Stone, brick, earth, concrete all store heat the same way. Central heat sources still outperform wall-mounted ones in cold environments. Rounded or softened shapes still move air better than sharp angles. Surface area still determines heat loss. Many modern homes ignore these basics. They chase insulation numbers and forget structure. They seal boxes tighter and wonder why systems struggle. They add technology to compensate for design flaws that didn't need to exist. Off-grid living rewards restraint. A well-designed structure reduces the need for constant input. Less fuel, less maintenance, less stress. That's real independence. The frontier lesson isn't to copy the cabin exactly, it's to copy the thinking behind it. Observe the climate, respect duration over bursts. Plan for nights, not evenings. The man who built that stone circle didn't fight winter with force. He cooperated with it. He accepted that cold would come and shaped his shelter accordingly. That approach still works. Modern builders don't need to live like the past, but they do need to remember it. The best solutions are often already tested by people who couldn't afford to be wrong. Build smart, build steady, build for the worst day, not the best. That's frontier wisdom, and it's still the warmest strategy there is.